loud.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Yep, so we've got the recording started. And I do appreciate reminders on that. I can be terrible at remembering. So let's get started. So I think to make it best for everyone's computer monitor size, I'm going to move some tabs around first. So let's have our, because I want to use it on my laptop screen, so that way people will all be on the same size. There we go. So let's do a share screen here. So my primary focus, as Bennett isn't here, is I essentially want to make sure everything is set up and good to go on our AWS resources. Let's move this to that screen, and then I want to just do a brand new whole tab. That way nobody has to deal with my 5,000 tabs and I don't forget where I'm at. So first thing I want to make sure, I updated everyone's permissions onto AWS. So if we could all go and sign into the console, I want to make sure that we all have access. So that way, if you can go to S3, you'd be able to see all of our buckets.
Could we just quickly verify that?
Yes, that's what because I updated everyone's permissions. So if you could all sign in and let me know.
So Duncan, I have just signed in right now. How would you guide me to see
Sure.
where?
So do you want to take over share and I can walk you through it?
Sure. So I hope you are able to see my screen. So I am inside.
So click on the S3. Well, let's see at Slack Gizmo. Yes, click on the S3 link.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. So everyone saw that just essentially from clicking S3. So there's another alternative that you can do. So Hitarth, if you go and click the grid on the top left that says services, there are the list of recently visited services, but there's also a search bar. So if you type in the search bar at the top,
Okay.
just type in like S3, it would show you there the S3 resources.
Thank you so much. I'll stop my sharing right now and I'll allow you, Duncan.
All righty.
Thank you.
So also, fun note, as the host, I have the power. I can steal a screen share at any time. So you have been warned. I have the power. I like to try and keep things fun. So S3, this is one of our main core resources. If anyone's got any issues accessing it, let me know, but we should all be able to. And I'm glad to see that the permissions update got everyone access. Time to move some of these bars back out of this computer screen and to that one. Cool. So additional resources. So first, let's go over some of the rules for AWS. So this is essentially going to have not just the stuff that we're working on, but we have a lot of different elements from a lot of different projects. So if I look up the test project, for example, we see that we have a lot of different sites, names, buckets. If we go into our EC2 resources and look at those instances, like right here on US East 2, I mean, we pretty much have most of that owned. Other than a little bit of share with Jimmy here. But if we look at, say, US West Oregon, not Oregon, California. There we go. Then you can see we've got all kinds of Gizmo Lab elements, simulators, more test work. So anything that is not directly a PV validation hub element, don't touch it. You have a lot of powers, and through a lot of powers, some terrible accidents are possible. So good form, number one rule, if it is not ours, if it is not labeled PV validation hub, just say no. That being said, we do have a couple oddities because some naming conventions didn't get initially followed, and we are going to correct that. is for our S3 buckets. Everything that has currently been made for S3 has been put into the PV Insight application bucket for the validation hub. So that's why I may have mentioned to everyone who we walked through yesterday, this needs to get renamed because I want to ensure safe operations within our AWS environment. Now, the next point I want to follow, and this is something I need to
could you show us an EC2 instance where you have that PV label?
So if we go to EC2 in US East under instances, everything is labeled as PV validation. So that is our main tag there.
So you are like having some keywords in the name of the instances, but do you put like key value pair like tags also?
We also do have tags. Every element that we make will need to have a project tag with the PV Insight value. That is going to be another tag standard we're going to need. And I would also like to have like under name, the name of the tag, that's what translates to the name of the instance. Instead of just PV validation worker, I would like that to be PV validation hub worker. So I want to make sure we keep that consistent across all elements.
Yeah, and just in that S3 interface, I just see some are like PV dot inside, some are PV dash inside.
So for the S3, the only thing that I was tracking that is directly related to the validation hub is the PV-Insight application bucket. Everything else that is not that, do not touch it, ignore it. It doesn't exist to us. Everything that we use and everything we're going to use is going to be having its PV validation hub label. Some people, there's a lot of stuff here. Like if you look, there's stuff from 2019, 2020, ages long before I ever worked here. That has caused some lack of standardization. I don't like that, but because I don't know what a lot of that does, I'm not touching it. I'm not messing with it. Unless it's a problem, I'm not dealing with it, and neither will you. So if we follow that rule, we're all going to be happy, we're all going to be safe, and we're not going to ruin anything from Bennett or David or anyone else who's got any long-term research. There's stuff from even before these dates. So let's just keep everything locked within our naming scheme. And the only thing that we are going to correct is the PV Insight application bucket. Now, if we want to create additional resources, we're going to utilize clear naming. It's going to be the PV validation hub, whatever we want to call it. So if we want to have a PV validation hub database transfer, whatever, we can create those resources. And as long as we tag it right, we're golden. We can do pretty much whatever we want. So that is the safety rule number one with working within our AWS environment. Cool. Now I just knocked myself a little bit off track, but that was a great question. So I remember. So the next thing I want to go over is our IAM permissions. So generally, any permissions management that will be going through me. Now, considering what we're doing is going to generally require any permission under the sun that you could need. If you ask for it, I'm probably going to just give it to you. But the way permissions work is that we have specific user groups that we assign people to. And these user groups have a whole variety of different permissions, and good software engineering practice and good security practice is to make sure you only give the level of permissions that people need. So especially with like, if you've got a temporary team that's only in for a few months, that level of control is important, because if you guys had user permissions and suddenly somebody somewhere was up to something crazy evil and went through and decided they wanted to delete all the users, we can't allow that. So basic protocol, I can't give you guys admin. So if there's anything you need that's specific, let me know, and I will figure out how to generate the roles for it. And I'll add it to user groups. So if we look at anything that you guys got added into, So you all would have like the 4 different groups. These are the core groups that the last team had used that we also upgraded and developed along the way that give a lot of fun powers. And considering the extent that we look to upgrade our project, there's probably going to be additional groups and permissions added. But this should give absolutely everything you need to get started. So that's also why you weren't able to see S3, because some of these groups had S3 access in them. I think it was probably software engineers that had that permissions. Yeah, that gives the relational database, that gives our EC2, that gives S3, that gives a lot of stuff. Lambda, Route 53, we're going to need like all of this. Oh, what? That gives IAM user change password. And that's probably for changing your own password. Don't change other people's passwords if you do happen to mess with IAM. I had to give you guys that group, otherwise you couldn't get access to a lot of the other core stuff. So not that I had much choice there. So if you do need any additional roles, permissions, anything with IAM, the only house rule I've got for that, just check with me first. I'll respond to it and work on that as quickly as possible because those are blockers. But just leave a lot of that control in my hands, and I will be incredibly happy. So that is working with IAM. So outside of that, we do have, there's like a ton of different AWS resources that all have different applications. A couple of the ones that have not been fully set up with the project, but are highly useful would be things used for the Elastic Container Service and Elastic Container Registry. I don't think we have anything really set up in the Slack Gizmo organizations, AWS specifically. I know I've got them in some other organizations, but I can't give you guys access to OpenFido to see how they do it there. So that means we both have the freedom and constraint of having to set up our Elastic Container System ourselves. And the Elastic Container System is important as part of our overall flow of the application. So how a lot of that shakes out, let's go to our validation hub. And let's look at I should have on my Figma the good flow basics somewhere. And let's just zoom massively. So one thing that I wanted us to be able to have implemented is that we're going to be utilizing essentially each of these different analyses are run inside containers. I know this is an early diagram, but it illustrates the point well enough. And so for our system, and everyone's going to wind up having their fingers in this at some point, we're going to be essentially queuing up with load balancing. I think there should actually be a better diagram around here. Ah, there we go. There's a better one. Hand tool. There we go. So essentially, when communication comes, it'll hit our load balancer that will spin up containers from Kubernetes service. And so each of these containers, I would like for us to have essentially like a pre-set up standardized container. We'll be going more into what kind of container images are and how those work. If you've had experience with Docker and you pulled an Ubuntu image and then like made some changes to it and pushed that back to Docker Hub, extremely similar to that. And so one automation we're going to have is going to be building and uploading our essentially Docker image that will have our core script that will be able to run any analysis that gets dropped in. We're going to standardize as much of it as we can. So that way, when we get multiple submissions, they'll all go through our load balancer. They'll each get a fresh container spun up to run the application in a clean environment. And so that is done through Amazon ECS and Amazon Elastic Container Registry. And so the container registry Oh, we actually do have some couple of items you can see here. We'll just have images that are based off of another publicly available one. So whether we want to use Ubuntu, whether we want to use Debian, if we want to use, I think, let's avoid anything with Mac because I think those require very specific resources. So if we can just stick with like a Linux environment, those tend to be easiest and most stable. So either Ubuntu or Debian, and don't use Amazon Linux. I hate Amazon Linux and I will not encourage it.
Yeah, I have a
So,
question. Remember yesterday we've talked about different tasks, right?
yeah.
So for the container, for the image, for the Docker image, do we only have one image that will pull different kinds of analysis and different kinds of algorithms, or do we have one image for one task
So we will,
essentially for
yeah.
one like analysis?
So great question. I intend for us to have essentially one standardized image that will have multiple instances spawned. So each task that we have, because essentially what we've got for our system is that, let's actually go to where S3 is, right? And so in S3, as we see, we've got multiple different analyses.zip files. Most of these are here just as demo purposes, and I'm pretty sure most of them don't work. But essentially, as what this example runs is that our image, all we need to really have in the image is the core scripts that would pull the relevant analysis that's being called and would pull the relevant submission that has been made. So if someone makes a submission, it gets scanned for security vulnerabilities, it gets approved, it will get saved and uploaded here to S3. So we're going to literally just be downloading the submission and downloading the evaluation script out of S3. So that way, then we can run them against each other within our currently organized framework. And the point of choosing a single image is that if you use a different operating system for an image, that means a different analysis could have a different runtime and it makes the comparisons invalid. So we need to have a standardization. So that means that whatever image we choose, if we choose to use Debian 11, that's it. The image is going to be Debian 11 across the board. So we have a standardized comparison.
Yeah, so we only have one image and like one application in that image which receives two parameters. One is which analysis do we want, and the other is which submission do we want.
Yes.
And once we got these two parameters, we pull these two zip files from two S3 buckets and basically run whatever we want to run.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's nothing it's meant to be too crazy out there, but the fact that we're trying to pass all of this information and all of this infrastructure within AWS, that's part of what'll make a lot of the setup difficult.
Yeah, then do we like would we use like AWS Lambda or something for this purpose?
We can see.
Yeah.
So the point of this upgrade is that currently we have a single SQS queue that goes to a single EC2 instance. It's not even using the Elastic Container System that I was wanting to use. So in upgrading the implementation, we can choose to use Lambda. We can choose to use any other variety of resources. In fact, Lambda would be a very fantastic resource to use for this system.
Yeah.
So if we do choose to use Lambda, there are additional considerations, and we're going to be getting to the cross-functional part of now the conversation. And so this is my most exciting favorite part. So let us now look at this as our whole team, right? So each of you guys that I've spoken with yesterday have our very specific focuses, whether we're on the high volume number test on the front end, our security team, or our validation engine team. So validation engine team, if you're building up your Lambda queries to now, or Lambda function calls that will then call the Elastic Container Registry pull our image and spin it up in the Elastic Container Service so that we can run our algorithm, get its data and outputs and send it back. Lambda queries have certain rule sets for them. So let's go to Lambda. And this is going to now tie into your work with security team. So when we go into Lambda and we're building our Lambda queries, what we're going to have is, where's a good one? I don't want to do Ohio. Let's go to was it Northern California that they had it? Or was it West Oregon? Let's do, yes. So here we have a setting set up from a CMU team last week for tests, or not last week, last quarter. And they have a Lambda query that is handling all their database calls. So this is a little bit different. They're using a serverless querying system compared to our system utilizing Django. But initially, just looking at the query, there's a lot of information here, and it mostly would seem secure and all right. But there's a weakness to here. And that's when we come here and look at the API gateway configurations. So here for the API gateway, you see we've got our endpoint coming to stage, database, setting ID. But if we dig through some of these settings, let's see here. Where do they have it? Because I found it somewhere. Actually, was it actually in the Git itself? There was essentially an acceptance rule for Lambda, and I need to remember where it was. I'm pretty sure it was in the gateway here. Was it under details? Was it under the endpoint? Because there was a specific rule setting test permission prod. I know it's somewhere, and it's the kind of thing the security team will need to be making sure that they fully understand and check, is that there is a specific spot that says what kind of connections that they accept. And that was a bit of a problem because they had it accepting all incoming queries from any source.
So Duncan, this is the whitelisting issue that we discussed about yesterday.
This would be connected to whitelisting, and this is connected to clean internal communications. Okay. So I want to find it where it was. I know it's around here somewhere, and I don't remember where, and that is making me very sad. Because if I don't remember where it is, then that means somebody's got to find it. Where was it? Oh, this is going to drive me crazy. Where did they set the rules that allowed any query to come in and it would accept it? Was that general configuration? No. This is going to drive me really off the wall. It's not anywhere I would have thought it was. I remember I found it, and now I don't remember where it was. Okay, it's somewhere. Security team, I will count on you. That really, really grinds my gears that I can't find where that was. Or was that under application level Lambda? Oh, I think that was it. Application level Lambda, maybe. There's somewhere for it. We're going to make sure we don't do it. There we go. Apologies that I don't remember where it was, so I can't precisely show you guys. long story short, we're not doing blanket star accepts from any IP. We're going to make sure our communications are appropriately controlled. That's going to go for our whitelisting. That's going to be also core to our general API security. So I know I've showed like for the Django element of our validation hub. Let's go to here really quick, as we're going to need to upgrade, dismiss the system. So that way in our settings.py, currently our Django API says allowed hosts is star. We're going to want to upgrade that kind of element and make that specific IP lists. So how do we manage AWS things like IPs? So there are two core elements that come through into managing that. One is Route 53, where Route 53 is essentially our main DNS resolver. And so let's see if we can't get a good resource on it. But essentially Route 53 is core for setting up a lot of our domains and managing traffic hosts, our security zones. So Route 53 is going to have a lot of configuration we're going to need to work on and do. This is going to play into the initial setups done through our validation engine team. This is going to play into the security checks done through our security team and security upgrades. And this is, we're going to have our high volume team member likely also helping out on occasion with some of these resources. Then the other element that we had was our VPC, Isolated Cloud Resources. And so this one, let's go to US East 2. This is where our core VPCs are. And so let's see here. We should have 3. So they named it Slack PV Insight VPC. We're going to fix that. This is PV Validation Hub. Actually, you know what? Let's just rename that while I'm here. PV Validation Hub. Add new tag, project, PV Insight. There we go.
Oh, one thing that the key and values are case sensitive. So are we using like all lowercase or?
Make your life easy, go all lowercase.
Okay.
If we stick with that, then we're solid. However, the tag name for name, I think, has to be uppercase, as that's an AWSism. I think we can test it. Let's test it. They're not even letting me change that. So that one is a required.
Okay.
So yeah. So the reason we have to have project as well as a tag with the PV Insight, that is for our cost analysis. So essentially, AWS costs money. So that means we have to pay for any resources that we've got that are extra and floating around. And so by having our PV Insight tag, that just tells them who to charge. Which is not you guys. You guys aren't being charged, but make sure we include our appropriate tags for that. And so we've got our validation hub VPC here. And VPC contains a large amount of, like, we've got route tables. It's got additional things that I probably can't even tell you what on earth they do, like DHCP and network ACLs. Likely, we're going to have to know what all of these are. They're going to look fantastic knowledge items for DevOps career. And we can set up different subnets, network connection rules. These are all kinds of things that are going to need to be built and customized for building out our application. So that is another great couple of resources that we're going to need to work with.
Okay, for that Django app, can you quickly explain what this app is doing?
So for our Django application, so let's go to our general overview here. So the Django application and the React application are two core separate elements. The Django element is our API. That's our access point. It's a RESTful API. If you've got a query, you send it to a route on Django, and Django will then handle what elements of that query need to be passed around. The React element, that's our front end. And everything that's a standard basic website element. So when we go to our localhost 38,000, everything that we see here, this is all built on the front end. The front end depends on the API to then reach out and get any other additional resources it might need. So when I go onto my little network here, why is that so huge? And I start popping around, we can see that it will send queries out. And where queries fail, we see we get 404s where things are undefined, something's hitting a route, it's supposed to look for a resource, can't find it. So these are all things that come from our routing through our API. While we can go serverless with Lambda, personally, I do like the old school centralized API. It's very familiar, but going serverless is something that would be possible. That would require also a heavy amount of rework. So now when we look at this element here and what Django does, Django is connecting to our Dynamo, or not Dynamo, it's connecting to S3. So this will need to be updated. So we're not using Dynamo. S3, yay, S3. It's connecting to AWS RDS and utilizing that for our storage systems. So that way, then when those have been used, it will also find like whatever data. So like say we make a submission. Submission's being run against a specific analytical task. Well, the submission and analytical task start here in our front end. Those will get sent down to a specific route in Django. So first we'd save our analytical task number that they selected from our front end here. And then the submission comes in, likely would be getting evaluated in our API just to make sure it's safe. We don't have any code scanning currently. I would love to have that. So if we've got time to work on it, you could potentially try and find some work for there. And at that point, it will then upload those items to AWS S3. Once we get confirmation that those items have been cleaned, saved, and stashed on our S3, along with the route information saved into AWS RDS, it will then go and spin up our containers. The reason it's got to be saved into our S3 and referenced in RDS is so that way it can also be consistently re-referenced here when you go to a leaderboard, but we'll get to that in a minute. So essentially at that point, we've got all our information here, comes back to Django, and now we need to spin up and run the submission. So it will then send out to the load balancer, we'll spin up our Debian 11 container, and then we'll run our evaluation script and our analytical task in our container. Once that's done, we get our results, we save those results back into our S3, we save that results path into our RDS, and then we will return those to the React front application, and that's all organized here by Django. And so once it gets returned here, that is what will then let us go to our submissions. And now the submissions will be pulling up all of the associated submissions for your user. And you can see all of that, or the blanket ones. We've got a few different options, and we're going to need to make sure information is filled out for all of those. So that is
one question. When a user when a developer submits an algorithm, how do we know which analysis should we run it against?
So when a developer submits an algorithm, The way we know is that they'll be submitting that algorithm against a specific analytical task. So when they go to, so this is uploading an analysis, but that's technically not quite right. And we don't have our add submission button here, which we should. So that's something that's got to be cleaned up. There's quite a few fixes that we're gonna have fun with.
Maybe in dashboard, I remember like in dashboard there's a sub
Yep.
like
We have the upload analysis here, which I
yeah,
don't know if they named that incorrectly.
I definitely see the submission like or I think I've seen like the submission
Yeah.
web page for
So,
like for algorithm, I mean,
yeah,
but I don't remember where.
there was a working video that they had, and I think part of the reason it's not showing up, because note that when I go to dashboard, we've got a few different undefineds that show up in our network here, and I feel like what's part of what's happening. Can I go to console? It's only giving 404s on that account. But I think that like when they're trying to do a query and getting no data, it's not actually showing up the part of the fake data and fake algorithms they had set up. But essentially, there should be an analytical task, and you're uploading your algorithm specifically under a specific analytical task. So, unfortunately, this is not the best version to demo that. Because I still need to get some stuff set up for it, and I'm just jumping around everywhere, which is not helpful for long-term having everything correct. Maybe it's in docs. Do we have a docs example I can look at? No, that's the entity relationship diagram. UX workflow. Multiple scoreboards. Upload algorithm. Okay, so that upload algorithm that they have there is not meant to be upload analysis. It's uploading a specific algorithm. That makes sense. So that is going to need to be fixed. This is not upload analysis, it's upload algorithm. And one of the options when you upload the algorithm is that you should be able to select the specific analytical task you're trying to run it against. So that way, when you hit that submission here and you hit submit, you now have your task that you're testing against, and you have the algorithm, and those are both data points that are being sent to our API. And so we are going to need to make sure we've got a confirmation point at the API level that both of those pieces of information are given. So if somebody tries to do a submission and they haven't selected an analytical task, or if someone does an injection where they're trying to send a submission without a task, we check it at our route level to make sure that we've got all of those elements. And if they're not there, standard error checking means that we'd shoot back like I wouldn't say a 404, but like maybe a 401. We got to send the appropriate error code saying that there was an issue. Well, the 400 series is for not found. I think that would be 300 series.
300 series is for client side, I think. 500 is for the server side.
Let's see here. Server error.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. So there's client error, server error, redirection. So we would probably look at, I think, a 500 series we would send back. So it's a very easy Google here if you just look up HTTP status codes, and then we can put in the correct. Ooh, there we go. 406, not acceptable. So if somebody tries to do some invalid request, we wouldn't do a 403, we would do a 406. It's not acceptable for you to submit your algorithm without a task. It needs to have something to be tested against. And so that would generally also make sure people can't get away with their injections. There's a lot of different requests for HTTP responses. Let's just try and keep our lives simple. And if we need one, we'll look at it and make sure we choose the right one. And outside of that, try and not worry too much about them. Because the biggest ones are 200, 201s, and we'd want 404 and 406. Potentially 401s, actually some unauthorized stuff. Yeah, 401s. So we've got like 5. Outside of those 5, we would have to really be working hard to find some edge cases to get those needed for us. Our app isn't supposed to be that hyper complicated. Cool. So that is a nice little intro there. So now for the last part of any questions so far before I move on to the last thing.
Yeah, one question. So what is a specific task for the front end part? Actually, I'm not quite sure. Or do we have some formal development process for front end?
Front end, we have a few different things that we're trying to get fixed. First off, we have our profile issues. Every time I go to the profile, it's not saving up our profile information correctly. So we need to update our profile to be able to be edited and updated correctly. Second, we've got a variety of different little naming conflicts that need to be cleaned up. So for example, this is saying analysis sets, we're uploading an analysis. That's incorrect. We are uploading an algorithm to be tested against an analysis, an analytical task. So we've got some cleanup to do in terms of analysis sets and how a lot of this is kind of framed and oriented.
So I can free design my own UI part.
So for a lot of the UI, I am here. I will help you.
Okay, sure.
We are going to work through a lot of this, and there's going to be a lot of full stack work that will happen to here. So a lot of these UI elements are connected to stuff that's running through our API, that's also running through our backend database. So some of these aren't necessarily too complicated to fixes. There's just a lot of tweaking work, a lot of cleanup work. There's going to be some schema upgrades, and some of these might be impacting our additional other teams. And so we're going to have a lot of crosstalk, cross communication. Security team, when they go through looking at a lot of our front end and trying to update it for OWASP security, we're going to probably find all kinds of injection weaknesses, cross-site scripting weaknesses, and we can do buddy programming. So we can work through different elements with different team members all at the same time. While each of you have your specific focuses, we are all a team. And I do expect a lot of cross communication. I do expect a lot of cross work that we're going to be tagging together on. And ultimately, everyone should at some point have exposure and experience with all the different resources. So if you're worried about AWS, don't worry, you're going to get to play with AWS. And the whole kit and caboodle. So that should hopefully, did that answer your question well?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Great.
All righty. So for the last few minutes here, the last thing I want to go into is some of our GitHub workflow work that we're going to be doing together as a team. I know I went through some of it initially with all of us together, but now this is part of our team element I want to really emphasize. So when we go to our validation hub organization here, right? We currently have our main branch, and we've got a develop branch, and we have a release branch. I don't think we're currently using the release branch. We might, but that's something I need to rework as part of the process. But for our core part of the process, any kind of update and upgrade you're going to be doing, aim for doing a format similar to the branch I've got here. So I've got a branch called add S3 emulation. I like keeping it all lowercase with dashes. So if you've got something that you're working on and you're branching off, our main focus is we're going to start with develop. We're going to branch off of develop, make sure we've got everything pulled and up to date. Then we create our branch. If you're doing a bug fix, you would call it either bug. I'd actually call it just fix dash bug name done. So if the bug is fix profile, so you just do fix dash profile, right? And we'll make a branch. We'll do that fix. Try and keep our branches as focused as we can, because then that means once our branch work is done, what we're going to then be able to do is we're going to submit a pull request. So the way that works is we just go to pull requests here, make a new pull request. We're going to be going from S3 emulation into develop. So you can see I've got two changed files with 50 additions and 0 deletions. And I can create our pull request. Generally, I like to leave good comments on what you're doing, what and why. This is one thing I am doing. That kind of notes, so we can kind of try and keep it clear. So if I want to make this an appropriate example, this pull request will add an S3 substitution layer. I can't spell substation. No. You know, there we go. S3 emulation. I spelled that right before, so I can spell that right again. This pull request will add an S3 emulation layer to speed up local development. So what's one thing it does? Adds folder structure and Docker file to build an S3 Docker container, and then creates an S3 emulation app for file system storage requests. So it does two things. So when I've got those down, I hit create our pull request. And so now we've got the pull request here. Now, as you can see, I've got some fun rules that when you've got your pull requests, you got to have an approving review. That approving review will generally be done by yours truly. And it will also run some automated tests. We're going to want to make sure that we've consistently keep up our automated testing system and try and keep tests up for most of what we do. But considering the way development works, to a certain extent, we're probably going to have one of our last couple sprints be cleanup and test implementation. And so until we get that review, merging is currently blocked, unless you happen to have admin powers, which we all do, because we're going to have to adjust settings and secrets. And then you have a little cheat code you can hit there that would just let you merge without a review, but I don't recommend that.
Yeah, one question. So can we use the issues feature and link our pull request to those issues?
Yes. So we can use issues. Progress can be linked into issues. It's very simple to tag an issue. How do I tag an issue in PR? Great question. So we have our issue. This is now issue number 6, right? And so then the way we can address that is when you have a pull request that's meant to address issues, simply we can go into edit, and then this PR addresses issue number 6. Update comment. Boom. When you do toss in that number 6 there, it just automatically grabs it when you just select that enter. So to show you again, all you need to do is you toss in that number sign. They'll give you that drop down, and you want to select the appropriate issue associated with it. They do some magic when you do that, and their magic brings out the whole tag for that issue PR. And you can click it and go straight back to the issue. And so once this pull request is closed, it should close the issue as well.
Once we created a pull request, could we still add new commits to this pull request?
Yes. So while a pull request is up, every adjustment you make to that branch will be added. So a great way to demonstrate this, I want to get out of tests. Let's go to Validation Hub. This should be on my correct branch. PV Validation Hub, add S3 emulation, git status, Docker Compose update, git add, git commit, compose to add S3. Push origin, add S3 emulation. Boom. As soon as I hit that, we can now see that this is rerunning because it's now just gotten the update. So we can see my comment from the just freshly pushed commit, update compose to add S3. And now that you've done that, it's rerunning the tests that are currently set up, as well as everything else that's been adjusted. And so you can see now in Docker Compose, it now has the added S3 element here, host port. It does some closure. You can expand it out if you wanted to see where I added in like React client depends on S3. You can set dependencies, fun stuff that way. I'm going to set up a full course to cover that one. But you can go in depth into the files changed, and it updates your pull request. So you can make changes to a pull request on the fly. And so once you've got your pull request done and everything's good to go and you merge it into develop, then the next step for everyone else is that as soon as we've got that merge into develop, we're going to make sure that we have essentially our weekly merge days. So one of my thoughts, we can adjust this as we go, but 1 day per week, we're going to dedicate as a merge day where everything that's been approved, we're going to merge into develop. And then once that's been merged, everyone's going to pull down those latest changes. One huge problem we ran into last semester was we had a ton of people who did a ton of work, and all of it was kept in entirely separate branches. And then they tried merging it all together all at once, and it was a nightmare. And so I'm not sure how much information was lost from how we had to ghetto rig together everything, but ultimately we couldn't actually merge it. And we had to build a new branch where we manually tossed everything back together. So I'm pretty sure that some potential code that may have been made at that time was lost when we had to do that. Not the biggest fan. So we're not going to let that happen this time. And everyone's going to stay up to date on all of their branches at all times, or at least once a week. So that essentially now covers everything that I had as our major points for our coordination meeting. Future coordination meetings are going to generally be led by Bennett, and it's going to be us giving our updates from our code review meetings on Tuesdays. But since I happen to be the only one here and everyone else was gone, I gladly stole all of this time to cover a lot of good working points. Cool. So before I let you guys go, our objective for what we're going to go into on Tuesday next week to go then into the brief. You know what? I'm going to take the share back. I'm going to make this quick. So our final objective is going to be to study up on everything for our repositories, all of our different tasks, and all of our different AWS items. And we're going to start working out our plan for our validation hub Trello. Not connected communities. I want this one. There we go. Validation hub Agile sprint board. So on Tuesday next week, when you guys are fully familiarized with everything, I want you to play around with the repository. I want you to build it, and I want you to start analyzing all the different elements that you're going to need to work on. And Tuesday, we're going to work together and we're going to build out our work plan on our Trello board. We're going to have all of our sprints set. We're going to fill it with the cards. I know I had some initial discussions with you guys yesterday, and we're going to have this completely filled out by the end of our sprints on Tuesday. And then we're going to brief Bennett and Sujata on our plan and our work on that Wednesday after. So does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
All righty. So I will be available for you guys to reach out to me for all the rest of this week. Due to a lot of urgent work I need to get done for tests, I'm going to be primarily focusing in on that, but please let me know anything you need for this. If you need a permissions update, if something's confusing, you've got any questions, Jerry, I'm willing to make time. We can set up a meeting that we can go over front end elements to help you familiarize with that and work through some of that code. I'm very much so open to all of that. Let me know anything you need. You guys are going to be one of my #1 focuses if you need my attention, and otherwise I'm going to be focusing on tests. Alrighty, we've gone over by 5 minutes. I do apologize. But with that, I'm going to stop our recording.